here from far away, especially people from Fiji, New Zealand, New Caledonia. So beautiful to have the Pacific Islands with us. And tonight we have a very special lecturer. He's very special because he's my friend, and that's Father Rene. Father Rene Ramirez. Thank you very much for helping us tonight with the lesson, Rene. Okay, we can start, I think.
Okay, just to give some context to why we are talking about forum externum and what are we talking about, because it sounds all very abstract, doesn't it? I must say I first came across those terms in February 2021 when Pope Francis addressed the participants of the General Assembly of the Focolare movement. So I've put on the slide, you see a picture of that day and a quote of his talk. So he speaks about crisis. It was a very beautiful talk, encouraging and challenging at the same time. As he's talking about crises, he says, there is a responsibility of those who hold positions of governance to face collective and organizational crises. But on the other hand, spiritual crises of individual persons that involve the intimacy of the person and the sphere of conscience, these must be dealt with by people who do not hold any position of governance. And he says this has been a good rule of the Church since time immemorial. And it applies not only to moments of crisis, but it applies in general to accompaniment, spiritual accompaniment of people on their journey. And so he says this is a wise distinction, and it's indispensable, the distinction between external and internal forum. And in fact, not distinguishing the sphere of governance and the sphere of conscience, which is what it means. If you don't distinguish it, this gives rise to abuses of power and other abuses that we have witnessed. So this was the beginning of hearing of these terms, and since then they have been appearing here and there in talks by different people. And we've been trying to understand better what it means and what this distinction means in practice. So when Bruno and I saw that this topic was in the UPM lessons, we thought it would be a good opportunity for us to learn more about what these terms mean, where they come from, and what to do with them. So that's why we asked Father Rene to give us a hand with that. One practical thing for today, we thought we'll do it a little different for the Q&A at the end. So Rene will do his presentation. At the end, there will be time for questions and answers. But to make it more manageable for the translation, we would ask you to put your questions into the chat function. So you see at the bottom of your screen, there's a little chat button. Write your questions in there, please. And so it'll be easier for the translator and also for Rene to keep track of those. And then at the end, we can talk with these. So please put your questions in the chat at any time, and we will get to them at the end. Right, so with this, I'll hand over to Rene. Looking forward to your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Janina. And thank you also for that short introduction. I think it puts things into perspective. I should say also that it like put me into the right perspective on how to present this, because yeah. So I'm just sharing my screen. I hope. So good evening, everyone. So the talk this evening as you have heard, would be the distinction between internal and external forum. Basically, it's, well, we'll know what those things are later. But basically, it's actually centering on the conscience. To understand what conscience means would really be a great help in understanding those two things. But again, it's not as simple as it sounds, because the Catechism of the Catholic Church dedicates several numbers to it, which are really very interesting. In fact, in the beginning, I wanted to start from discuss some items in the Catechism, but then I clarified that this is not the only talk on conscience, but there was already an introduction about Chiara's thoughts and writings on conscience last July, and maybe another talk about this in September. So, but maybe it's worthwhile to do a kind of a review, just so that we would be in context on what we are talking about. So, my slide doesn't want to move. Okay. Disney's Pinocchio represents this little cricket. I think the name of the cricket is Jimmy. And the fairy asked Pinocchio to listen to Jimmy. So in a way, Jimmy acts like Pinocchio's conscience. Jimmy tells Pinocchio what to do, what not to do. So in a way, the things that we'll talk about today are actually things that we know already and we have experience about, but maybe we just didn't have the correct language for it. That's why sometimes it's difficult to distinguish or difficult to understand. But maybe empowered by some terminologies, distinctions, and the language, it would help to understand them better. It's not just Disney, but we also have, I think it's a worldwide phenomenon, this thinking about the good and the bad angel. You know, there's this good angel on one side telling us the correct thing to do, and maybe the bad angel or the demon who tells us, no, you can do it, don't worry, it's okay. No. So in a way, this internal struggle in us is also sometimes understood also as what we refer to as the conscience. Some popular belief also would just say trust your gut, or what is your gut feel. So those are actually attempts in order to maybe understand what the conscience is. The Catechism of the Catholic Church from number 1776 to 1802 dedicated a good, it would be worthwhile to consult them. It's really refreshing to go back to them and read them, even the formation of the conscience, for example. I would highly recommend that you review them. I would show and flash in the slides how do you say, in brief part of the catechism. Those are short sentences that actually were deductions or a summary of the preceding numbers. But for example, just reading Catechism of the Catholic Church 1777, it reads, moral conscience present at the heart of the person, enjoins him at the appropriate moment to do good and avoid evil. It also guides particular choices, approving those that are good and denouncing those that are evil. It bears witness to the authority of truth in reference to the supreme good to which the human person is drawn, and it welcomes the commandments. When he listens to his conscience, the prudent man can hear God speaking. Now, the summaries that I was referring to earlier would be 1795. Conscience is man's most secret core and his sanctuary. There he is alone with God, whose voice echoes in his depths. And the next one, conscience is a judgment of reason by which the human person recognizes the moral quality of a concrete act. (1797). For the man who has committed evil, the verdict of his conscience remains a pledge of conversion and of hope. So one thing that we have to understand here is that conscience is not just what we are about to do. It's not just also what we are doing, but it could also refer to what we have done. No? Sometimes there's this guilt feeling after we have done something. So that's conscience that works like a side view mirror that we look back and say, oops, I think that was wrong. Or it could be something that we are currently doing, and there's this voice saying, hey, what are you doing? You should not be doing that. No, stop. Or a deliberate thing, no? Like, should I do it or not? Should I go to the abortion clinic or not, for example? So there's deliberation, no? In 1798, a well-formed conscience is upright and truthful. So I just want you to notice that phrase, well-formed, because we are duty-bound to form also our conscience. So a well-formed conscience is upright and truthful. It formulates its judgments according to reason, in conformity with the true good willed by the wisdom of the Creator. Everyone must avail himself of the means to form his conscience. Faced with the moral choice, conscience can make either a right judgment in accordance with reason and the divine law, or on the contrary, an erroneous judgment that departs from them. I think in this number of the Catechism, it presupposes that we educate also our conscience with the knowledge, and with reasoning. That's why sometimes what constitutes the moral acts would be somebody is knowledgeable, is aware that what he's doing is really like bad or harms people, because sometimes they may not be aware. So the culpability would be less, the responsibility for a person would be less. However, there is the responsibility for everyone to be informed and to form their conscience as well. A human being must always obey the certain judgment of his conscience. So if deep within you, you are certain that your conscience is clear, then you are duty bound to obey your conscience, because in itself, in you would be convinced that that is the right thing to do. Then the culpability there will be your lack of education, maybe, or your lack of formation. However, if deep within you, you are certain that you have tried your best and you want to do the right thing, then you are duty bound to obey your conscience. That's actually a lot to unpack also. (1801), conscience can remain in ignorance or make erroneous judgments. So the Catechism also recognizes that. Such ignorance and errors are not always free of guilt. And finally, the Word of God is a light for our path. We must assimilate it in faith and prayer and put it into practice. This is how moral conscience is formed. So, more or less, we have seen how. Oh, those are just the last eight numbers on the conscience, the shortest one, because those are the in brief part of the Catechism. But if you go starting from 1776, number 1776, it's really interesting how the Catechism tries to explain what the conscience is and how to form our conscience. Now, that is just maybe a review on what the Catechism says about conscience. Our concern for today is actually based on all over on the paper used at the Marian Popular University, presented by Rafael Tapogang. I hope I pronounced it correctly. In the International Center on March 5th of this year. So the title of the paper was Contribution from Canon Law, Distinction between the Internal and External Forum. So Rafael wanted to show how canon law supports what Janina at the introduction referred to as the internal and external forum. Everything the Code of Canon Law says about the internal forum and external forum is deduced from various canons in which it speaks of the power of governance, the obligations and rights of all the faithful, the formation of clerics, superiors, and councils and religious institutes, the minister of the sacrament of penance, and whatnot. So as I also mentioned in the beginning, we already have the experience of the things that we are talking about, what we'll talk about this evening. Maybe we just didn't use the technical term for them. When we go to confession, for example, everything that we discuss with the confessor is a matter of internal forum. Then we'll go into that. So let's go to the definitions. So internal forum pertains to the domain of the conscience. That's why we spend those slides in trying to explain what the conscience is, because everything that pertains to the conscience is the domain of the internal forum. External forum concerns the domain of government or the external things that we see. In reality, it would be more correct to say that the internal forum corresponds to the judgment of an act, on an action, in relation to one's personal conscience, while the external forum corresponds to the judgment of an act in relation to an external action. The external forum is the space in which one speaks of external things, visible acts, public actions, while the internal forum is the space of the private sphere of the faithful, of their conscience and intimacy. Now, this is a bit important. The degree for distinguishing between external forum and internal forum does not concern matters, but the degree of publicity that the individual wishes to give to certain legal situations. I'll give an example. I thought of an example. I hope that this will help us understand that. For example, a nurse got some COVID rapid antigen test from the hospital without informing her boss. That's an external action. That's a visible action. And when she got home, she's conflicted. Oh, I got this without informing my boss. No, so it remains. The action was external, but the conflict is internal. Now, what we were saying is the degree of this for distinguishing between external forum and internal forum would be the degree of publicity that the individual wishes to give, because that internal conflict could easily translate into an external thing if she later on recants and say, boss, I'm sorry, but I brought things home without asking your permission, something like that. So it's in fact maybe it would also be worthwhile to my first encounter actually with maybe not the terminology but the reality of the internal and external forum was during my second year in the seminary. I approached my my prefect of discipline, and I said, Father, can you hear my confession? And he refused me, and so that actually triggered an inquiry on my part. Why did Father refuse me? I was just asking for confession. And then later on, it was explained to us this terms about the internal and external forum, that as formators, they are not encouraged to listen to the confession of their foremans. So that was that. But then, of course, through the years of formation, then it became clearer and clearer why that was so. And we will also discuss that later on in the following slides. So what we said earlier is that it's a bit difficult, like what Canon 130 says, of itself, the power of governance is exercised for the external forum. But sometimes, however, it is exercised for the internal forum, so that the effects which its exercise is meant to have for the external forum are not recognized there, except insofar as the law establishes it in determined cases. Canon 130 highlights the difficulty of establishing a clear separation of the two, because they're things happening in the same person, within the same person. In this wholeness, in spiritual and material dimensions coexist with a constant intertwining. The inner choices he makes produce effects in the outward acts he performs. That's just an acknowledgement from Canon 130 that sometimes it's a bit tricky on how to navigate what goes into the internal and the external forum. So to understand better, the external forum refers to the actions towards society, towards others, for which we are accountable. It's the realm of public acts, observable behavior. I think that's key, observable behavior, with the consequences they may generate. So it's really literally external. Internal forum concerns our private life, the most intimate, that which we share with a spiritual companion, spiritual director, a confessor, under the seal of confidentiality. This cannot be communicated to third parties without our consent. So that's the internal forum. Of course, when you discuss the internal forum, you would definitely also have items there that happens in the external forum. However, that's why it's a bit tricky. But it's all your internal, the reasoning, the intention, the motivation. Those are the things discussed in the internal forum. So Pope Francis, referring to the internal forum, said that this is not a trivial expression. It is stated seriously. The internal forum is an internal forum and it cannot go outside because it's internal. And I say this because I have noticed, I think this also explains why he used the same theme when he addressed the Popular General Assembly, because maybe deep within, reports or problems deep within the Vatican would have involved matters concerning internal forum and used by people that, in order to judge someone or, I don't know, make decisions which have not been made because of some knowledge from the internal forum. Let us put this in this way: blend the two things and take from the internal forum to make decisions in the external one and vice versa. Please, this is a sin. So blending, confusing them, it's very dangerous. It's also very uncharitable. So there was this address at the Roman penitentiary about this. This was actually that address. I think it was in March 2019. And then I was just thinking when Janina mentioned that the General Assembly was in 2021, how in 2 years, this is something that the Pope really keeps within himself, that's something that he really values and something that is really, that he deems important. Because maybe some things have happened regarding this blurring of the distinction of the demarcation line between the internal and external forum. Canon 983. So there are two items in this canon. Number one, sacramental seal is inviolable. Oh, now I just, top of my head, I just remember that also here in Australia, that actually happened during the pandemic, no? The mandatory reporting that Victoria passed, saying that priests are now mandated by law to report if somebody, even in confession, mentioned that they have, I don't know, like they have abused minors or something related to that. No? And those are really things that happened in these past 2 years, maybe not just in Victoria, but in some other places. So in 983, the sacramental seal is inviolable. It is absolutely forbidden for a confessor to betray in any way a penitent in words or in any manner for any reason. The interpreter, I never came across this, that there will be an interpreter in confession, but then the canon provides an article for it. If there is one, and all others who in any way have knowledge of sins from confession are also obliged to observe secrecy. So it's not just the priest, but if it so happens that there's an interpreter or there's somebody who went into counseling and which with matters of the internal forum, even those people are bound by secrecy. And we'll see later on that it's not just a normal keeping of secret. There are very, very serious consequences. 984, a confessor is prohibited completely from using knowledge acquired from confession to the detriment of the penitent, even when any danger of revelation is excluded. I'll give you a quick example. Like if I am a formator in the I'm sorry, that was my reality before, so my examples are related to that. So if I'm a formator in the seminary and somebody confessed to me that they did things against the rules of the seminary, serious things, and during the deliberation, if we still have to accept this for the renewal of vows, temporary professed, they are applying for the renewal of vows, I could not use that knowledge in confession to say in the council that no, we cannot accept him, even though I do not reveal what was the mistake made, just because I'm basing my judgment from that knowledge in confession. So in my example previously, you would understand why it would be more prudent for somebody in position not really to hear the confession of his subordinates or his foremans, just because it could trap that person in truly contributing to the discussion. For example, if there's an application for renewal of vows or perpetual vows or ordination of some sort. So, so number two, a person who has been placed in authority cannot use, or this is what I was telling, in any manner for external governance, the knowledge about sins which he has received in confession at any time. Now, 1388 is actually an expression of the seriousness of the matter. A confessor who directly violates the sacramental seal incurs a late sentencia excommunication reserved to the apostolic see. One who does so indirectly is to be punished according to the gravity of the delict. Late sentencia means that there's no deliberation. Just because you did it, it means you're automatically excommunicated. That's how serious the church takes this, the inviolability of the seal of confession. So again, an interpreter and others mentioned in Canon 983 who violate the secret are to be punished with a just penalty, not excluding also excommunication. I mean, if we just pause for a while and just really think that excommunication is not just saying, okay, you're out of our order, you're out of the movement, or you're actually out of the church. And this is the last slide. Members are to approach superiors with trust, to whom they can freely and on their own initiative open their minds. Superiors, however, are forbidden to induce the members in any way to make a manifestation of conscience to them. You could not just say, hey, by virtue of the vow of obedience, the promise of obedience, come and confess to me, or tell me what happened about these things. No. Still, for the protection of the sacramental internal forum, Canon 630, number 5, prohibits superiors from hearing the confessions of their subjects unless they spontaneously request it. But as I said in my example, I think it would also be prudent for superiors, even though they request it, to to kindly decline for his freedom. No? Anyway, I have been information to seminary, and there were cases when a formator had to recluse himself. I told you this already, from deliberations, just because it happened that it's either he heard the confession of somebody or somebody confided in him about a personal problem or something similar. So these are so the discussion is just about the things that are found in canon law. You'll see that they are not consecutive. It's here and there, but the canons are really, I mean, spread in different parts in order to truly re-emphasize and reinforce the seriousness of the matter. So very important. I do not know if it has helped to understand the distinction between internal and external forum, but as I said, in itself, I think we all have this experience. It's just that we do not have maybe the technical language to describe it. So maybe some of the examples would, and maybe hopefully would have helped you grasp what we are trying to understand here. Thank you. If you have questions, we'll try to see if we can answer them. I think the distinctions would really be very, very useful, especially for people information, just because there is a you know, the process of application, deliberation, and acceptance of things. So it's very important to know, you know, the space where you could express yourself, and the limits also. Yeah. But then for people who may not be in that structure, I mean, this also applies to, I mean, the sacrament of penance and also spiritual direction. In fact, I think in the paper, Raphael mentioned the extra sacramental internal forum. The extra is not bound by confession, but refers to spiritual direction.
Their questions are coming. Fantastic. So, okay. Ian makes a comment that for terrible confessions, it must be very difficult for the priest to go beyond that. I believe that must be the case. Chrissy and Lindy ask, how are priests going to do this in Australia? Referring to Chrissy and Lindy, referring.
I think she's referring to mandatory reporting.
Yeah. Yes,
yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
So, like we have according to the, since it's a law and in itself really it's a disregard for religious freedom, what the government of Victoria did of imposing that law is actually a disrespect for our religious freedom, and that's but then since the law is already there, coping, like in the parish, the first thing we did was we are avoiding now face-to-face confessions, especially for the general public. I mean, there's still the usual people who comes, so that even though, you know, if people comes in confession and they're behind the curtain, etc., then it would be more difficult for us because we would not know whom to report or so that's just a you know, a work around the law, but you know, you cannot report if you do not know. So that's one. And though of course you know already, on the contrary, for children it's totally the opposite. For first reconciliation, etc., it's all done in the open. But for us in the parish, the usual confessions. But really, it would be a challenge. Maybe not now, but I'm really thinking that this will be a problem later on. Especially, you would know how, like, I feel, I don't know, we are almost helpless if anybody with some malicious intent would just come to us and pest us, like say something, and we did not report it, and they could say, I confessed to the priest and he didn't report me. So it's all technical, and we're really put in a very difficult situation. I do not know what Bruno's thought is on that.
Well, it's a very serious situation. In fact, the Archbishop said, rather than breaking this seal, I'm ready to go to jail.
Yes, correct. And not
that
only
really impressed me.
in breaking the seal, you're late sentencia out of the church. So,
yes, that's
so
right.
why break the seal?
Yeah. And the other thing, I think, is not uncommon to have interpreters for some confessions sometimes, and it is necessary. I had two experiences of that.
And I could share an experience for the older Vietnamese in our parish. They would go and I mean, especially when we didn't have any Vietnamese priests, they would go to the confessional, enumerate their sins in Vietnamese, and they say, "Finish, Father." What do you do? So I said, "Okay, in God's mercy, I'm giving you the absolution, but Ecclesia
Yes.
the Church of Lies."
So then there is Marie who's asking, do you think that it is helpful to have a spiritual companion or confessor to help with forming our consciences? So more towards the formation of conscience.
I think definitely. In fact, it's also encouraged not to jump confessors. Sometimes people would confess here and there. If we're really after formation and we really want to be helped, it would help to have a confessor. I mean, somebody whom you confess to regularly. But then it's not just the confessor. I mean, a study of moral theology, for example, not the course, but maybe a discussion, an input like this on Zoom would help also the formation of conscience. It's actually the knowledge of what is right and wrong, or why is it right and why is it wrong? Because the more we know, the more we are able to guide our reasoning power, and that is related also to the formation of the conscience.
Yes. Lita says, thank you, Father Rene. You mentioned you're going to explain why Father Ken couldn't hear your confession. Is that because he would put himself in a position of conflict?
Who's Father Ken? No, I was referring to my formator. Yeah, he must. Yes, I do not know if Father Ken anyway. Yeah, he would put himself in a position of maybe what I've confessed would have put himself in the position of conflict, but he's just being prudent in case what might be mentioned. Of course, he didn't know what I was confessing, but if what I confess may, or anybody's confession, information may put the superior, since he's in a position in the formation team, who would be required later on to decide on my application to move forward the formation ladder. So yes, it would put him in a difficult position. So of course, there are also times when, after knowing the individual, sometimes you know that nothing, it's the usual routine confession, so it's all right. But then, it's actually a balance between these two. Because as we saw in the other canon, if in case, theoretically speaking, somebody used that as a somebody confided in you, you could not make any decisions, especially if you're in that position that you should make a decision. You would just say, I cannot comment, you decide on yourselves. No, if there is a group of 4, so you would just refrain from discussing and participating. I don't know if that's clear.
Les prêtres, parce que voilà, on parle toujours de la maladie du curé, là, à force enfin, comment on dit ça? Pas dire vulgairement, mais à force de confesser, de recevoir les confessions.
Oui.
Mais lui, il se vide comment? Qu'est-ce que nous, on peut aider? Parce que je pense que toute cette négativité-là, il va emmagasiner. Mais comment nous, est-ce qu'on peut l'aider? Je ne dis pas qu'on va aller chercher à savoir la confession, mais comment nous, on peut aider, nous, à notre retour, le curé de notre
Oui.
paroisse,
Oui.
pour bien, je veux dire, pour qu'ils vivent bien, parce que il arrive que parfois nos prêtres sont un peu aigris ou fatigués, je ne sais pas, mais je pense qu'il y a tout ça aussi qui joue.
Ah,
Est-ce
oui.
que nous, on peut apporter quelque chose? Comment?
Ah oui, d'accord. So he's asking, he said, how can, for us who are simple parishioners, and we can see that at times priests may be having a very hard time because they are listening to very hard, difficult confessions or cases, things that's really difficult to live for them, probably for the priest. So that he said, hey, can we as lay people, how can we help the priest not to tell us what they heard, but in which way can we help them to empty or to make it lighter for their life, or how can we do for our priests? Because sometimes we can see some are bitter, or some maybe because they have such a weight on them. So how can we do something for the priest to help?
Well, my first reaction to that is sometimes it's not actually the gravity of the sin that makes it difficult, but maybe for the confessor to look for a way to help the person. The problem there is that like you could not even allude to, you may not, the seal of confession, and Bruno could correct me if I'm wrong, the seal of confession is does not even permit you to allude that you got it in confession, or because if people put the puzzle together and say, oh, Father said that he heard from confession, and then I know that this lady went to confession yesterday, even without the Father telling. So that in itself is, in a way, a bit of a violation also of the seal of confession. So we just actually don't talk about it. But then maybe the challenge there is sometimes, and I could say that the grace that maybe goes along confession is that most of the confessions I've heard, I usually forget for some reason. Sometimes the faces of the people will be familiar to you, but the particular confession would for somebody who comes regularly and maybe confess the same things, maybe you would kind of remember, but for people who comes and goes,
So there is Martin, who says, going back to conscience, there is still a responsibility to follow their own conscience and report a serious wrongdoing, the external forum. This is beside the internal forum, where the person is seeking reconciliation with God in confession. So the person confessing a murder is encouraged to go to the authorities, the external forum.
Yes, of course, yes, correct, agree.
Yes. And oh yes, Helen saying confession is a sacred gift for us. Certainly is. Yes.
In fact, we also know that concretion is a requirement for a true confession. So part of contrition is being consequential. For example, to what Martin mentioned about going to the authorities because of that external form. It's where I would say that the concretization of faith is lived through this external act of going to the authorities.
Oh, thank you. It's 7:33, so if there are no other, urgent question, we might even conclude at this point. But first of all, really thank you, Rene, for unpacking this for us.
I hope it, in a way, it helps a little.
Look, I have a million of questions in my mind, but they will need to set, and some of them need to go somewhere else probably. But that was certainly informative and very interesting. So thank you. And thank you for everyone who has engaged in asking questions and or behind the scenes, such as Therese and Alex, and then of course Bruno and myself, to make this work. Now, Bruno, when is our next appointment?
Yes, I had to make this announcement. Next meeting in September, we don't have any of confession really. It's beautiful. Thank you. Ciao.